On July 26, 1944, the headquarters of the 2nd Tank Army of the 1st Belarusian Front recorded the receipt of order number 00448/OP. This document defined the direction of movement for the forward units toward the Warsaw axis. The combat journal noted the state of the materiel and technical base. As of the specified date, the Army had 810 tanks and self-propelled artillery installations at its disposal. However, the technical readiness of the fleet was 72%. The remaining vehicles required medium and routine repairs. The logistical supply lines stretched 350 kilometers from the main supply bases. Subscribe to the channel to support the development of documentary historical content. The economic potential of the sides by mid-1944 was in a phase of critical strain. The German command of Army Group Center, after the defeat in Operation Bagration, sought to stabilize the front along the Vistula River line. To accomplish this task, highly mobile reserves were transferred to the Warsaw area. This involved the 4th SS Panzer Corps and the Hermann Göring Parachute Panzer Corps. The combined fist of German armored forces in the Radzymin and Wołomin area numbered 580 units of armored vehicles, including heavy battalions equipped with Panther and Tiger machines. The Soviet side had a numerical advantage, but suffered from a shortage of fuels and lubricants and ammunition. Deliveries were carried out by motor transport over bombed-out dirt roads, which reduced throughput capacity to 40 tons of cargo per day per corps against a norm of 120 tons. On July 29, 1944, the 3rd Tank Brigade, under the command of Major General Vedeniev, came into contact with units of the Wehrmacht's 19th Panzer Division. The hour-by-hour chronicle of events indicates the start of the engagement at 12:30 p.m. in the vicinity of the settlement of Okuniwo. The Soviet command made its first large-scale planning error. The front headquarters intelligence section failed to uncover the concentration of 5 enemy tank divisions on a narrow sector of the front. Operational summaries mentioned only scattered infantry groups and up to 2 battalions of assault guns. This led to the decision to continue the offensive without organizing echeloned anti-tank defenses on the flanks. On July 30th, units of the 3rd Tank Corps occupied the town of Radzymin. By the end of the day, forward detachments reached Wołomin. The depth of penetration into the German defenses was 25 kilometers. At the same time, the width of the breakthrough corridor did not exceed 10 kilometers. A so-called operational sack had formed, which in Wehrmacht documents was termed an opportunity for a classic envelopment. The German command, in the person of Field Marshal Model, employed the concept of mobile defense. The 19th Panzer Division and the Hermann Göring Division began simultaneous movement from the north and south, aiming to cut off the supply lines of the Soviet Vanguard. On July 31st, the situation took on a critical character. At 6 a.m., the 5th SS Panzer Division, Viking, struck toward Okuniwo. The enemy's artillery fire density on this sector was 40 barrels per kilometer of front. The Soviet 8th Guards Tank Army, positioned in the 2nd echelon, was unable to deploy in time for a counterstrike due to a lack of fuel. Less than half a tank of fuel remained in the vehicle's tanks. Due to disrupted communications, the Corps headquarters lost control of the subunits for 3 hours. During this time, German Panthers from the 10th Panzer Regiment of the 19th Division occupied the dominant heights along the Radzymin-Warsaw Road. It should be noted here as the second fact of discrepancy in the sources. In the official report of the headquarters of the 2nd Tank Army, it is stated that the enemy employed up to 200 tanks in a single attack. However, According to the material accounting logs of the 4th SS Corps, no more than 80 vehicles participated in the first wave. The inflation of figures in Soviet reports served to justify the loss of initiative and the inability to organize effective direct fire against the maneuvering enemy groups. The technical precision of German Zeiss sights at distances exceeding 1,500 meters allowed Soviet T-3485s to be knocked out before they entered the zone of effective return fire. August 1, 1944, became the day of the most intense clashes. The 3rd Tank Corps found itself in complete encirclement. From the north, it was pressed by the 3rd SS Panzer Division, Dead's Head. From the east, units of the 4th Wehrmacht Panzer Division. The ring closed in the area of the settlement of Kobylka. Soviet tankers switched to circular defense. Ammunition expenditure amounted to 0.9 combat loads per one operational vehicle. The request for air support was satisfied only partially due to adverse weather conditions and the remoteness of basing airfields. Il-2 attack aircraft conducted 140 sorties, but due to the lack of clear target designation, part of the strikes landed on their own positions in the wooded areas. August 2nd is characterized by the methodical destruction of the blockaded units. German tactics were based on the use of small combat groups consisting of 3 tanks and a platoon of panzer grenadiers on armored personnel carriers. They identified gaps in the defense and conducted deep outflankings. The losses of the 3rd Tank Corps by the evening of August 2nd amounted to more than 200 units of equipment. 57% of the personnel were put out of action. The Officer Corps suffered irreplaceable losses. Regiment and brigade commanders were forced to personally participate in the fighting as gunners or drivers. An audit of command decisions shows that General Radzymin overestimated the capabilities of his units to overcome prepared defenses. The Armored Forces Charter of that time prescribed introducing large formations into a clean breakthrough, rather than using them to storm fortified nodes without heavy artillery support. The 3rd Tank Corps was thrown into battle without preliminary combat reconnaissance, which constitutes a gross violation of tactical guidelines. The third example of planning error lies in the topographic orientation. The command failed to account for the swampy terrain in the floodplain of the Naru River, which restricted Soviet tank maneuvers to narrow defiles, turning them into convenient targets for German anti-tank crews. On August 3rd, the remnants of the 3rd Tank Corps attempted a breakout in the eastern direction. The operation was coordinated via 9 R-type radio stations, whose operations were suppressed by German electronic warfare means. Fewer than 3,000 men managed to escape the encirclement. Around 60 tanks were abandoned due to damage or lack of fuel. German trophy teams in the following days recorded the capture of 40 operational T-3485 vehicles. These data are corroborated by the photo chronicles of Wehrmacht propaganda companies operating in the Wołomin area. The statistics of losses for the period from July 25 to August 5, 1944 are as follows. The 2nd Tank Army lost irretrievably 284 tanks and self-propelled guns. Human losses amounted to about 5,000 servicemen, of which 2,800 were killed in action or went missing. The German side claimed the destruction of 540 Soviet tanks, which is a clear exaggeration. According to Wehrmacht archives, the own irretrievable losses of 4 tank divisions amounted to 76 vehicles. The loss ratio of 1:4 in favor of the defending side indicates the high tactical level of German tank crews and effective interaction of various branches of the armed forces within one operation. The outcome of the battle for Radzymin had strategic significance. The offensive of the First Belarusian Front on Warsaw was halted. The front stabilized on this line until January 1945. This allowed the German command to free up resources to suppress the Warsaw Uprising, which began on August 1st. From a technical point of view, the battle demonstrated the vulnerability of Soviet tank armies when operating detached from infantry and powerful artillery. Logistical collapse became the main factor of defeat. The distance of 300 kilometers proved an insurmountable barrier for the supply system of that time. Analyzing the state of the material technical base after the battle, it should be noted that the Second Tank Army effectively lost its combat capability for 1.5 months. Of the 810 tanks in service, fewer than 400 remained operational. Repair flying detachments worked in 3 shifts, restoring damaged vehicles collected from the battlefields. The German success at Radzymin became the last example of a successful operational counterattack by the Reich's tank forces on the Eastern Front. It showed that even in conditions of general retreat, experienced formations such as the SS divisions and Hermann Göring preserved high combat effectiveness through the skillful use of terrain folds and aerial reconnaissance data. From the point of view of military art, the Radzymin battle is a textbook example of a tank engagement on converging courses, followed by a transition to a defensive operation under conditions of encirclement. Here, all the technical shortcomings of Soviet communication systems and the advantages of German guidance systems came to light. The use of heavy Panther tanks as mobile firing points allowed the Germans to control key road intersections, paralyzing the movement of entire brigades. The Soviet experience gained in this battle was taken into account in planning the Vistula-Oder operation, where special attention was devoted to creating mobile supply groups that followed directly behind the tank corps. The boundaries, after the completion of the active phase of the fighting on August 5th, were fixed along the line of the Vistula River and the western outskirts of the settlements of Radzymin and Volomin. German troops retained control over the railway junction, ensuring uninterrupted supply for their grouping in Warsaw. The stark result of the 10-day confrontation lies in the tactical victory of the German Tank Corps, which managed to halt the advance of an entire front by concentrating forces on the decisive sector and exploiting errors in the opponent's troop control. Continuing the detailed analysis of the chronology, it is necessary to turn to the condition of the 36th Tank Brigade. On the morning of July 31st, the brigade had 52 vehicles in service. After making contact with units of the SS Totenkopf division during 4 hours of combat, the number of operational tanks dropped to 19. The main reason was the flanking maneuvers of German groups, which penetrated into the rear and struck Soviet vehicles in the rear armor. The density of German 75mm PaK-40 anti-tank guns on the forest edges in the area of the village of Nadazhin amounted to 12 units per kilometer of front. This created an insurmountable zone of destruction. Logistical analysis shows that during the entire Operation Bagration, this was the first instance when the pace of the advance exceeded the capabilities of the rear services. The Second Tank Army advanced at a speed of 50 to 60 kilometers per day. Railway lines had been completely destroyed by retreating German units. Restoration proceeded at a rate of 10 kilometers per day. As a result, by the time of reaching Radzymin, the gap between the final unloading point of the echelons and the forward line amounted to 400 kilometers. Ammunition resupply was carried out using GAZ-AA 1.5-ton trucks and ZIS-5 trucks, whose payload capacity did not allow for meeting the needs of the tank corps under conditions of intense combat. A critical audit of aviation operations points to a complete lack of coordination. The 5th Assault Aviation Corps had no direct communication with ground units. Requests for strikes were routed through the Army and front headquarters, taking from 6 to 10 hours. In that time, German tank columns managed to shift positions by 5 to 10 kilometers. As a result, aviation struck empty areas or settlements already captured by the enemy, where Soviet prisoners of war were also located. This reduced the effectiveness of fire damage to a minimum. Losses in the officer corps of the 8th Guards Tank Corps over the period of the battle exceeded 40% of authorized strength. The most experienced cadres, who had been through the Kursk salient and the Dnieper crossing, were removed from action. Replacements arrived from rear area schools and lacked practical experience in coordinating with infantry under urban combat conditions or in wooded and marshy terrain. This led to a decline in the quality of tactical decisions at the grassroots level. Tanks often advanced to the attack without prior minefield clearance, resulting in the loss of up to 5 vehicles per kilometer of progress, even before entering fire contact with the enemy. German sources, particularly reports from the 19th Panzer Division, emphasize the high quality of Soviet steel, but note the primitiveness of tactical formations. Attacks were conducted in dense groups, allowing German gunners to shift fire from one target to another without any significant change in the horizontal aiming angle. The Soviet side's use of smokescreens was episodic and disorganized. Meanwhile, German units actively employed camouflage and natural cover to organize ambushes. An important aspect is the performance of the engineering units. By July 30th, in the Army's sector of advance, only 2 bridges had been constructed across the Vistula tributaries capable of bearing the weight of an IS-2 tank. This created massive traffic jams at the crossings. German aviation, exploiting 10-minute gaps in Soviet fighter cover, delivered pinpoint strikes on the bridges. As a result, 1/3 of the heavy tanks were cut off from the main forces and unable to participate in the counterattack against the advancing SS divisions. Fuel consumption statistics show that T-34 tank engines operated in forced mode due to the deep mud on dirt roads. Consumption reached 350 liters per 100 kilometers of travel instead of the standard 200. By the time the encirclement was closed, many vehicles had fuel left only for idling the engine for 2 hours. This deprived the tanks of maneuverability, turning them into stationary firing points. Under such conditions, German infantry armed with Faustpatron launchers managed to destroy up to 20% of the equipment on the outskirts of Radzymin. The overall tally of material losses for both sides during this short period is comparable to losses in major defensive operations. For the Wehrmacht, it was a Pyrrhic victory, as precious Panther tank reserves were expended to plug gaps on the front instead of being used for a counteroffensive under more favorable conditions. For the Soviet side, it was a harsh lesson in operational art. The cost of misjudging the enemy's forces and neglecting logistics was measured in hundreds of burned-out machines and thousands of lives put out of action. Archival documents of the Wehrmacht's 59th Army Corps mention that more than 30 tons of abandoned Soviet property were collected in the Radzymin area, including radio stations, maps, and officers' personal files. This attests to the degree of disorganization during the breakout from encirclement. Soviet reports on this fact remain silent, focusing on the heroism of individual crews. However, The dry statistics of staff reports confirm a systemic failure in rear security and the preservation of classified information. The battle's impact on the material-technical bases of both sides was long-term. The Soviet command was forced to transfer additional breakthrough artillery divisions to the Warsaw direction and strengthen anti-aircraft cover. The German units, meanwhile, received a brief respite, which they used to fortify the Warsaw defensive perimeter. This period of lull allowed the Germans to prepare the city for a prolonged siege, which later led to heavy fighting in January 1945. Analysis of artillery fire density shows that up to 1,576 mm Soviet shells were expended for each destroyed German tank. This indicates the low effectiveness of standard armor-piercing rounds against the frontal armor of German Cats at distances over 800 meters. Switching to 122 mm guns on IS-2 tanks solved the penetration problem, but their low rate of fire, only 2 or 3 rounds per minute, made them vulnerable to maneuvering Panther groups. Thus, the reconstruction of events under Radzymin in July to August 1944 reveals a complex picture of the clash between two powerful military machines. One was at the peak of its advance and suffering from overstretched communications, while the other used all accumulated experience in tactical maneuvering to deliver pinpoint and painful strikes. The result was a temporary parity achieved at the cost of massive losses in equipment and personnel. The events of July 31st require additional illumination in the context of the Wehrmacht's 507th Heavy Tank Battalion's actions. This unit, equipped with Tigers, was advanced to the Volomin area at 16 hours 0 minutes. The appearance of heavy tanks on a narrow section of the highway led to the loss of 8 Soviet vehicles within 15 minutes. Soviet gunners noted the impossibility of penetrating Tiger armor from a distance of 1,000 meters, while the return fire from the Germans' 88 mm guns knocked out T-34s with the first hit. This caused a brief panic in the ranks of the advancing infantry, allowing the Germans to occupy a favorable defensive line. In the headquarters documents of the First Belarusian Front, dated August 4th, there is a record of the need to conduct an immediate investigation into the causes of the front breakthrough in the Okunievo area. The commission, headed by Lieutenant General Telegin, determined that coordination between tank units and attached infantry had been disrupted at the battalion level. The infantry could not keep up with the tanks, and the tanks entered populated areas without machine gun cover, making them easy prey for grenadiers in the urban ruins. This was the 4th identified error that had become systemic for the entire period of fighting near Radzymin. The Chronicle of August 5th describes the final stage of the battle. The remnants of the 3rd Tank Brigade took up defense on the eastern bank of the Charna River. By this point, the brigade had 4 operational tanks and 3 BA-64 armored cars left. Ammunition supplies had completely ceased. The brigade commander decided to blow up the remaining vehicles, which could not move due to damage to their undercarriages. The Germans did not undertake active operations, limiting themselves to artillery shelling of the crossings. At 1940, an order was received from Army headquarters to withdraw to the main forces of the front. The consequences of the battle were reflected in the schedule of equipment deliveries from the Ural factories. The State Defense Committee demanded acceleration of IS-2 tank production with a modernized forward hull section, the so-called straightened nose, to improve the machine's survivability. The events near Radzymin became a catalyst for introducing new tactical methods, such as forming assault groups that included tanks, sappers, and flamethrower operators for operations in dense urban and forested areas. Statistics on losses of materiel by type of equipment show that light tanks T-70 and Valentine, used as reconnaissance vehicles, suffered the greatest damage. Their armor did not provide protection even from light anti-tank guns, and their armament was ineffective against medium German tanks. This led to a decision to gradually withdraw light tanks from tank corps compositions and replace them with T-34-85s. The German side also conducted an analysis of the battle. The command of the 4th SS Corps noted the increased resilience of Soviet tank crews under encirclement conditions. Despite the loss of command, individual crews continued to fire until the last shell, refusing to abandon their machines. This resulted in increased ammunition expenditure by German tanks, as they had to finish off each target until it was fully ablaze. Reports indicate that the average expenditure of shells per destroyed T-34 tank was 5 rounds. The economic outcome of the battle for Germany was ambiguous. Control was maintained over an important agricultural and industrial region in the vicinity of Warsaw, providing an additional 3 months of exploitation of local resources. However, the costs of restoring the combat readiness of 4 tank divisions after Radzymin placed a heavy burden on the depleted industry of the Third Reich. Repair plants in Radom operated around the clock, but shortages of alloying metals affected the quality of produced spare parts. The dry summary of the final stage of the operation near Radzymin records the stabilization of a 120-kilometer front line. The operational pause that followed August 5th was used by both sides for deep echeloning of defenses. Soviet command focused on accumulating reserves and preparing bridgeheads on the western bank of the Vistula, south of Warsaw. German command shifted to tactics of active defense, awaiting the next major strike, which would follow only 5 months later. Analysis of topographic maps from that period indicates the critical importance of Hill 142.2, located to the northwest of Radzymin. Control over this point allowed German artillery to overlook the entire river valley and adjust fire at distances up to 10 kilometers. Soviet attempts to capture the height on August 1st and 2nd with a motorized rifle battalion failed due to the lack of armored support, which was stuck in the swampy lowland. This once again confirms the importance of engineering reconnaissance, which was neglected in the Corps headquarters. In conclusion, it is necessary to provide data on motor transport losses. The 2nd Tank Army lost 640 trucks over 10 days of fighting. The majority were destroyed by airstrikes on the march or abandoned due to breakdowns off-road. This led to the infantry divisions following the tanks having to move on foot, lagging behind the schedule by 40 to 50 kilometers. This gap allowed German tank divisions to attack the flanks of the Soviet breakthrough unhindered. The events near Radzymin in 1944 remain in history as an example of the high tactical effectiveness of German armored forces in the final stage of the war. Skillful use of reserves, superiority in communications, and quality optics allowed inflicting a heavy defeat on the superior enemy forces, which had serious operational consequences for the entire course of the summer campaign. Studying this episode through the prism of documents and figures allows moving away from ideologized assessments and seeing the real mechanics of war, where logistics and small unit tactics play a decisive role in the outcome of large-scale battles. The scale of losses and the intensity of the fighting near Radzymin confirm the status of this battle as one of the largest tank clashes of the year. The archive figures are inexorable. the initial potential of the Second Tank Army was exhausted, not in the course of a strategic breakthrough, but in a local trap created by the enemy's operational skill and its own management errors. This study, devoid of emotional coloring, provides a factual basis for further analysis of the actions of armored forces in World War II. A check of the data on the condition of the road surface in the advance zone of the 7th Guards Tank Corps showed that only 9% of the roads had a solid surface. In the conditions of rainy July, the average speed of column movement dropped to 7 kilometers per hour. This made Soviet units extremely vulnerable to strikes by Ju-87 dive bombers, which conducted up to 50 sorties per day. Losses from aviation amounted to 12% of the total destroyed equipment. Special attention should be paid to the work of field hospitals. From July 30th to August 2nd, the medical service of the 2nd Tank Army received 3,400 wounded. Due to encirclement, evacuation to the rear was impossible. Mortality in field conditions reached 22% of the total admitted. This is explained by the shortage of antibiotics and dressings, the stocks of which were destroyed during the defeat of the rear columns on August 1st. This fact is indirect confirmation of the depth of the crisis in which the Soviet Vanguard found itself. In the documents of the 4th Panzer Division of the Wehrmacht, the use of a new modification of shells with tungsten cores is recorded, which allowed penetrating the turret of a T-34 tank at a distance of 2,000 meters. The number of such shells in the combat load did not exceed 10%, but their use was decisive in repelling attacks in open terrain. The Soviet side did not have analogues of such ammunition in mass production in 1944, which created a technological gap at ultra-long combat distances. The final summary of the distribution of losses by days shows a peak of activity on August 1st, when in 12 hours of fighting, 96 Soviet and 24 German tanks were destroyed. The subsequent days are characterized by a decrease in intensity due to the exhaustion of the offensive impetus of both sides and the transition to positional clashes. The final point in the battle was set not by order, but by the physical impossibility of continuing active operations due to the total wear of the materiel and the death of key command personnel. Analysis of the composition of repair reserves after the battle revealed that 30% of the equipment required major restoration in factory conditions. This meant their actual withdrawal from participation in combat operations until the end of the year. The German side, thanks to the proximity of repair bases in Germany, was able to return up to 40% of its damaged vehicles to service within 2 weeks. This logistical advantage allowed the Wehrmacht to preserve the core of its tank corps for subsequent defensive operations in East Prussia and Poland. Drawing the final conclusion, it must be acknowledged that the Battle of Radzymin became a demonstration of the limits of mobile formations' capabilities in the absence of proper support. Technical equipment, loss figures, and the chronology of events indicate that the tactical victory was achieved by the side that better managed its available resources at the critical moment. The experience of this battle entered the textbooks of tactics as an example of an effective counteroffensive operation against a numerically superior enemy. The fact recorded in the archives of the discrepancy in the number of losses is explained by differing accounting methods. The Soviet side counted as irretrievably lost only vehicles that were completely burned out, while German statistics included in losses any equipment requiring evacuation. When adjusted to a single standard, the gap in losses narrows, but still remains in favor of the German side with a ratio of 2.5 to 1. These figures represent the most objective reflection of the skill of tank crews and the level of command at this stage of the war. The battle concluded with the complete clearance of the Radzymin area of Soviet troops by the morning of August 6th. Observation posts established by the 19th Tank Division detected no signs of preparations for a new offensive during the subsequent 48 hours. Thus, the objective of the German counterstrike was fully achieved. The threat to Warsaw from the east was temporarily lifted, and the offensive potential of one of the Soviet Union's most powerful tank armies was seriously undermined. With this, the reconstruction of the combat operations is complete. The data correspond to archival inventories and combat logs of the units that participated in the engagement.